Last time on Guns and Glitter, Grace had a run-in with police and ended up having to sleep out in the alley behind the fox den. A regular client gave her a gun to protect herself while she lives out on the streets. Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lepki, and today I am sharing part 10 of my story, Guns and Glitter. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification button so you'll know when the next episode comes out. Grace walked into the club and made her way toward the back rooms. Between the money from the police officer and Carter's pistol, it would only take one good night at the club to get her back on her feet. She could postpone her dad's hospital bill for one day, if it meant she had a place to sleep. Feeling optimistic for the first time all day, Grace put away her duffel bag in her locker and borrowed Kira's shampoo and conditioner for her shower. She wrinkled her nose. It was going to take a significant scrub to get rid of the rotten trash smell. That was for sure. Optimism, it turned out, was the wrong choice. The other girls had caught on to Grace's game and shut her out of her usual clients for the night. One by one, she struck out on nearly every man she approached. The Vixens were competitive, and they weren't particularly subtle about it. At one point, an older man who fit Grace's usual profile came into the club. He was a particularly unattractive man with a round face. Freckles smattered his skin and his cheekbones, and his chin was practically non-existent. His gray hair was cropped close in a military buzz cut. He looked oddly familiar, probably some local bigwig. The other girls were occupied, so Grace started to make her passes. She chatted and flirted with other men until she knew she had her target's attention. As soon as she started to make her way to sit next to him, Blossom, one of the particularly unfriendly girls, cut her off and planted herself on the man's lap. She glared challengingly at Grace, who held up her hands in defeat and walked away. It wasn't a big loss anyway. She didn't like how the old man licked his lips and stared at Blossom's breasts when she landed on him. Some men simply weren't worth the bother. Looking around the crowded room, there seemed to be plenty like that. Rather than stalk the area in search of prey, Grace retreated to the bar. The bartender handed her a lemonade before she even asked. She grinned and plucked the decorative umbrella from the drink. Everyone knew she didn't drink alcohol on the job, but she liked to make it look like she did. The men tended to be a little more forthcoming when they thought the dancers were drunk. Slow night? The bartender leaned halfway over the counter to talk to her. Grace snorted. Understatement of the year. The other girls took all of my regulars. She watched as Kira forced a particularly shy gentleman to stick his face in her glittery chest. He was more of a butt man, Grace knew. It would work better if Kira accidentally dropped something and picked it up slowly in front of him. Sitting on his lap worked pretty well too. None of the other girls were doing particularly well with Grace's other clients. They threw themselves at the men, leveraged their bodies and their coy personalities, but their ministrations were shallow. It might work for a day or two, but pretty soon those guys will be asking for me directly. She took a sip of her drink. Why do you say that? Because I give them something no one else gives them. She smiled warmly at the bartender. My genuine attention. For a couple of days they'll enjoy those girls, but then they're gonna notice the lack of me. I should thank the Vixens, really. It'll make my job a lot easier. Well, aren't you the confident one? He poured a second glass of lemonade and handed it to her when her glass was nearly empty. I built my business on something that none of the other girls offer. I'm not confident. I'm smart. The bartender laughed. Smarter than some. He gestured toward Blossom, who led the older man into a back room. You know who that is? He looks familiar. It's probably the sweatpants throwing you off. Imagine a police uniform instead. Grace furrowed her brow. A foggy memory swam to the surface. A gruff-looking police commissioner talking about the drug epidemic in Esperanza on her family's small TV. She gasped. No way. The bartender smiled and leaned on his elbow. Yes way. Why does Commissioner Hayes come to the Fox Den? We're not exactly a premier club. I've been told he was kicked out of the nicer establishments. He gets a little... The bartender lifted both hands with splayed fingers and squeezed them. Gross. Yeah, no kidding. He yawned and wiped down the counter idly. Kira said the last time he came in, he tried to get her to have sex with him. Offered a ton of money, too. Creep. Isn't he married? Like a lot of men who came to the club, the commissioner had a dull gold ring on his left finger. No matter how many times she saw it, she could never quite get used to the number of married men and women who came to the club. The bartender shrugged. If he is, I feel sorry for the lady. He shook his head. Blossom needs to be more careful. It's dangerous for girls like her to get caught up in political shit. That's how hookers end up dead in hotel rooms. Grace shivered. The rooms are recorded, though. It's not like anything will happen in the club. As soon as the words came out of her mouth, Milson burst out of his office and raced through the lounge with red splotches of fury on his ruggedly handsome face. Damn it, you moron! His roar cut through the din of the lounge. All eyes turned to him as he raced toward the door of the private room Blossom disappeared through with the commissioner. You have 10 seconds to put your clothes back on and leave that room or I'm dragging you out by your pubes. The bartender smiled. And you were saying? Grace shook her head. I miss having faith in humanity. Ignorance is truly bliss, and I really hope they can get their clothes back on in 10 seconds because I do not want to see that old man's dick. Nilsson counted down as everyone in the lounge area stared with morbid curiosity. The dancer on stage, Charity, stood with one leg around the stripper pole and both eyes on Nilsson's back. Kira sipped at a cocktail that she most likely stole from the client she now blatantly ignored. Movement ceased, but the music pounded on. 3, 2, 1! Nilsson ripped the door open and stormed boldly into the room. A second later, he re-emerged with Blossom. The woman's hair was a mess, and her glittery lingerie wasn't properly fastened. She tried to tug out of Nilsson's grip as he dragged her to his office. A few feet from the door, she wrenched herself away. Don't you dare touch me! Damn it, Blossom, do you seriously want to do this in front of everyone? Nilsson crossed his arms over his chest. Deep lines clashed between his brow, and his mouth was downturned in disgust. Oh, please, don't pretend like what I was doing was any different from what we do out here every night. She flipped her hair. We're classified as sex workers. What's the difference if I make a little extra cash on the side? The law is the difference, you moron. Nilsson shook his head. You're fired. His eyes cast around the room until they landed squarely on Grace. You, in my office, 2 minutes. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Guns and Glitter. I hope you like the story so far. If this is your first time watching and you like what you heard, then make sure to go back and check out the story from the beginning. I'll post the link in the description. This is a continuing story, and I plan to share the entire thing with you on a weekly basis until the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification button so you'll know when the next episode comes out. Till next time, see you later.